Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. If somebody comes in, you're just going to have to forgive them for walking in the middle. It's not their fault, it's mine.
I'm going to hand them the microphone and have them finish.
Okay, there you go. So, my name is Cheryl Ogden. I think most of you know that by now. I am the director here, and we are very happy to introduce to you today Kyle Hall, who is here to talk to us about the Hall Company. And we are delighted to learn more about the Hall Company and to see what happens in that very mysterious building on Water Street. So without further ado, Mr. Hall, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, as Cheryl mentioned, I'm Kyle Hall. I'm the third generation to run the Hall Company. The business was started by my grandfather in 1961. I would like to introduce my mom is here, Carol Hall, and she's very important because she lived through all of this. She was dating my dad when he left college when it started, so she's seen this from the beginning to the end. Also like to thank my wife for being here, Christy. She puts up with me and all the crazy things I have to do for work. And my daughter, Cora, who maybe someday will love it, who knows? I think right now she wants to be a lawyer, so that could be handy too, so we'll see how things go. But anyways, thank you for coming. I appreciate your interest in what we do. I like to say that we're Urbana's best kept secret because no one really understands what we do. Some people have some thoughts they know a little bit about what we do, but they probably don't because we've done some interesting things and what we do is pretty interesting. So Miss Hall, could you please jump slides for me? Thank you. So like I mentioned earlier, we were founded in 1961. And what we do is we are a...
Can you give just a second? We've got a handful of people coming in. I was going to let them get in. I apologize. It's my going early.
Come on in. Come on in.
Come on in. I started a touch early. It's my fault.
All right. So, as I mentioned, we're the Hall Company, and we are a functional industrial printer. So you're probably saying, what the heck is that? What that means is we are printing products, but we are generally printing products with silver. So we are putting down conductive silver ink, selectively depositing it to make a circuit, to make a functional circuit, kind of like a flexible PCB. So that is our primary industry. Now, we print lots of things, but that's kind of what sets us apart from somebody like with making flyers or just yard signs. We get a little bit more technical in what we do. So what we would do, our product line would include sensors. We make large sensors for medical devices. That is our kind of our core business. So things like this. We make what's called a membrane switch. If I can pick it up. Something like this. You've seen this every day, you don't realize it. We make lots of graphical overlays. So things like this, they get used in all sorts of different applications. They're also the top layer of a membrane switch. We'll talk about that in a second. We also do nameplates. I guess I didn't really put this stuff in a very logical format. So metal nameplates, that's how we started. And then we do lots of other printed electronics that go into different things. So the other thing I guess I should have mentioned, is we make also rubber keycaps. So silicone rubber keycaps. A lot of people in our industry make those just kind of keep up with the Joneses, I guess, so to say. So the processes we would use to do this would be screen printing, digital printing. We do S&T component placement. That means we're putting little components on electronic circuits. We do etching, laser cutting, die cutting, laminating, building, and testing. So, yes ma'am.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Just more people.
She just went away to you.
Yeah, that's right. Give me a second to fix my microphone anyway. You still hear me?
Yes.
If you can't, there's something wrong because I'm pretty loud anyways. So I have about 30 employees. That changes a little bit from time to time. You know, we're pretty stable in employment right now, but the last 5 years have been a challenge with that kind of thing. If you went back to the 70s or late 60s, early 70s, we had up to 80 people in that building. But that was a very different time. Everything was manual. We had a second shift running at one point. Now we're pretty automated. Everything, we still manually build things, but we automate as many of our processes as we can. Plus, it's a difficult world. If you're not efficient, you don't exist. So we wear lots of hats, we do lots of things, but I've got a good core team, and we We do a lot of stuff with 30 people. Something that's very important to us is employee retention. So we're happy to say that in the time that I've come back to the company, I have given 7 different 40-year service awards, and that means a lot. We always say we want to hire people to retire. We want people to come to us and work until they retire. That's our golden dream. Doesn't always work, and it's getting harder and harder in this world, but that's kind of a goal we have. So Ms. Hall, if you could advance us to the next slide. Thank you. So the industries we serve: medical, aviation, industrial automation, scientific equipment, food production equipment, excuse me, military and defense, and sometimes we get our hands into consumer applications, but that's kind of a little rare. That's usually the really cheap stuff that comes from China. And then we do kind of every market. If you think about the products we're making, everything that you have or use has an overlay, a sensor, a printed circuit, a nameplate, everything. We can sell to any industry on the planet. That's the beautiful thing about what we do. My big customers would include GE Healthcare, Siemens Healthcare, Philips Healthcare, ComEd, Gentherm Medical. I know there's a lot of companies you've never heard of, but they make all sorts of stuff that you've seen. Konica Minolta, Honeywell Aerospace, ITW, In-Flight Biometrics, Aviation Ground Equipment, and there's hundreds of others. We have about 3,500 active customers on our customer list. Some of them order once a year, some of them order every 10 years, some of them order every day. It just depends on what people need and how they're going. Come on in. I said the last person has to get part of the presentation though. So some examples of things that we make in the real world: collision sensors on medical devices, controls for powered ambulance cots to raise and lower people, controls for ramp equipment to start jets on aircraft carriers. When they plug a jet in to fire it up, we make the controls for that. Some of the call attendant light signs on Boeing aircraft. It's usually the older Boeing aircraft. We still make tens of thousands of these. Controls on surgical medical equipment. We actually make some of the controls in the monorail. Believe it or not, when they had a couple monorails wrecked a couple years ago, we got a big order. Surprise. We make some of the controls you'll find in Panera Bread's ovens, and controls for galley equipment on Gulfstream jets. We make stuff for every industry you can dream of. That's just some of the stuff we think of. Somewhere in your life, you've run across something we make, you don't realize it. A lot of stuff we do is in hospitals, you don't really want to see it unless you work there. But Ms. Hall, could you advance us? So we're a small company, but we have a pretty big global impact. Usually people are surprised by this, but last year we exported 45% of what we made. So if you want to fix our economy, that is how you do it. You bring foreign dollars in from the other place in the United States. Our trading partners are generally in Mexico, Israel. We ship a lot to Israel, the Netherlands, China, and we have a customer in Chile, and we're developing a new customer in Hungary. Now, other countries we export to regularly are Germany, the Czech Republic, Switzerland, and Belgium. And on occasion, we ship stuff to Japan, Australia, England, and the Philippines. And then there's random one-offs all over the place. But we do a lot of business with GE in Israel, and that's kind of carried a lot of this. But I mean, it's kind of unusual for a company our size to export 45% of what they make. Most people are pretty domestic. Ms. Hall, could you advance this once again? Okay, so just to show you a little bit more about what we make. When I say we make flexible circuitry, this is just some examples of kind of what you see. So the products on the left are silver flexible circuits. That's most of what we make. So that's stuff like this. And what we're going to do is we're going to screen print this. So we're going to make a screen. We're going to go through a process called selectively depositing silver inks. So we're going to print only open areas on the screen. So the way you would screen print, we're going to have a drawing. From that drawing, a film is going to be made. We're going to take that film and we're going to emulsify it onto a screen. So what that means is we're going to hit up a really strong ultraviolet light. It's kind of like how photography works, how you would develop film back in the old days. It's going to leave the reverse image of that onto the screen. So everywhere in that film that would be open is going to be closed. Everywhere in that film that was a closed area will be open. And then you can only print in those open areas. So we'll do that, we'll build up circuits. Now they can also be copper circuits. A lot of times now they want a copper circuit. That's a little bit different. That goes through a process called abomination, which means that we're going to basically etch away what we don't need. So you start with a polyimide plastic form. It has a copper overlaminated on it, and then we're going to have it etched away by laser or a different process to have just that part of that circuit. So an example of that would be something like this little guy right here. Same concept, just sometimes a drawing will call it they need copper, just for the conductivity or whatever their device does. So Ms. Hall, could you please advance us? The next product is a membrane switch. Now, you interact with membrane switches every day, just you don't realize it. The touch-tone keypad in your microwave, that's a membrane switch 99% of the time. See some examples here. They can be any shape, size, configuration. Some of them have kind of crazy shapes because of where they have to fit on a piece of equipment. They can be tiny, they can be huge. So I can just tell you a couple of these. The one in the middle is actually a part that goes onto a naval landing vessel, and they told us, they said, hey, this part has to be able to withstand Marines running across it into the surf and everything. So we built it very robust. We sold them a bunch, and we didn't hear a word from that company for 10 years. We said, well, that was a bust. They didn't, that must not have gone in or it didn't work. About 10 years later, they called us and said, hey, we need some more of those parts. But no, we thought you went away. They're like, no, they didn't fail. Like, we said you were robust. So we can build something very strong if we need. But on the top, that's a piece of galley equipment that would go into a Gulfstream jet. So that's going to be like an oven for a Gulfstream jet. The thing down the bottom, it's called a hybrid switch. Sometimes people want our switch on top of a PCB, so it'd be a part like this. So it's more to save space on their equipment. They only have so much room. The one in the middle actually went on a $3,000 Viking wine chiller, so that was a kind of cool project. I never got them to send me one of those, but we did. And the thing on the bottom is a piece of Hobart food equipment, so I don't know what it is, something in their industrial food equipment division. Ms. Hall, could you advance us? Okay, so the really big business for us, we make collision sensors for medical devices. So if you have a big enough moving piece of medical equipment, the FDA requires you to have protection. So we have this kind of product. This entire thing is a safety sensor. So anywhere that you would touch on this would stop that machine. So if any of you have ever had a stress test, you've seen our part. So if you've had a stress test, they inject you with a dye, they put you in the thing, it spins around you. Well, they're worried if that machine malfunctions, if an operator makes a mistake, that machine could hit you and cause serious damage. Our sensor stops it. So we've been making those since about 1982. We'll get more into that story in a little bit, but it's our big business. They can also be very complex shapes. So this part, everywhere on this part is sensitive. This is a brand new GE part. This is kind of like their new Ferrari of scanners. So, and they have 12 of those on the machine, which is really good for me. So you can see there's a GE part. We're on Siemens. We're on all of GE's molecular imaging devices, all of Siemens molecular imaging devices. We make gigantic arms that go, covers their robotic surgical arms. There's a process called protein therapy where they need to shoot you with gamma rays to kill cancer cells or something of that nature. They have a thing that'll move the couch around because people are usually pretty sick in that state. This is to keep the operator of that from getting pinched against the wall. So that thing would go from like here to that desk over there. It's a very big arm. We make it for Accuray, so Accuray does different proton therapy. They make a device called a CyberKnife. Howdy. Come on up, you gotta help me, you're late. We do stuff for Konica Minolta for traditional X-ray devices. That's not usually something that we do. And this one's kind of fun. This down here, we do stuff for GE's CT division. That's actually a picture from Urbana's hospital. So we have a part up in Urbana Hospital. They were nice enough to let us take that. So, Ms. Hall, could you move us forward? There you go. Another product we make are called capacitive switches. So I guess I should have stopped on the membrane switch. I should have explained this. So a membrane switch is an electromechanical switch. So what that means is you're pushing two layers of circuitry together. So to make a membrane switch function, you have to have two layers of circuitry, something kind of like that. You have to have a spacer in between them. You generally want a graphic on the top, and usually there's adhesive on the back so you can stick it on something. But then you're going to press those two layers of circuitry together, you're going to get a short. So it's a resistive product. It'll tell the machine that, hey, this happened, do this. So that's a membrane switch. A capacitive switch, though, works more like your iPhone or your Samsung would. You're going to have an area that is, so this is a capacitive switch. So it's just one layer. It could be on a printed PCB or a flex circuit like we make. And as you interact with that, it's going to charge and uncharge a little pad 100 times a second, and it's going to take. As you do that, it creates a field, so it can tell you have a capacitance value to your body because of the blood and all the things going on with you being alive. If you touch that, it takes a millisecond longer for that relay to go back, so it tells that circuit board that, hey, this happened. So it's just a digital form of the same thing. So we do those. This hasn't taken off as much as we thought. We actually invested pretty heavily back in the 2000s, late 2000s, early 2010s. That we hired electrical engineers, kind of jumped in this field because it was a new and hot thing, and it's been slower. This will get us in the door. People are real excited about it. then they'll want to buy a traditional membrane switch. That's what marketing wants in a big company because it's cheaper. So that's okay. If it's a good marketing gag, it works. So Mrs. Hall, could you advance this? So we do other kinds of sensors too. So like I said, we print anything you can think of. So some of these are just different examples of other printed sensors we have. We do make proximity sensors. That's why we got into capacitive sensing technology, because we make these collision sensors. That's our big business. We wanted to know, okay, am I 10 inches away, 6 inches away, that kind of thing. So we kind of developed it for that. There's problems with that too. As you get into a hospital environment, you have all sorts of different electronics and radiation things going on. It can interfere with that, so it doesn't work as well as you'd think. Also, if somebody has gloves on, it can affect capacitive switches. If a patient has a blanket on, so a lot of these companies really wanted to get into that, and they kind of backed off and hesitated. That's how we got into it. We can measure how much liquid's in a vessel of a capacitive sensor. You can do printed traces that would go on a t-shirt. If you think somebody wants to like have a heart monitor on a shirt, for a gym's looking at that. We were actually working on this one on the top right, and they started right before COVID, so that one just kind of went away. But all sorts of different things like that. So, Ms. Hall, could you advance this? The other thing I talked about are silicone rubber keycaps. So that's something like this. You see these all the time. Here's another example of one. This is a product that we don't make here. They don't generally pour silicone in the United States. So we get them from Taiwan. But we do it more because our competitors are doing it. So we want to be able to offer to our customers. And it's just it's a different kind of control. It's usually on top of a PCB. So you would have an actual like static switch on a PCB, and then this is just, it usually gives you more of a controlled, kind of waterproof tight environment, but we sell quite a bit of these. This goes on a powered ambulance call for a company called Fernald Washington down in Wilmington. So, Ms. Hall, could you change this again? And then really how we got started with more traditional printed products. So there's overlays, which we talked briefly about earlier. These are just printed on plastic, and these also become usually a layer of a membrane switch. Then we have nameplates, and then we can also do lots of labels and stuff like that. So, kind of anything that's printed, rather digitally or screen printed, we can do. So we do lots of stuff like that. Ms. Hall, could you change it? Oh, sorry, the last thing we do is kind of specialty printing. So we do what's called dead fronted products. So that's a way you build up things so they look dark, but then if you put light behind them, you can see what's going on. So that's intentional so that you can have like a keypad hidden or something like that. We started doing that in the 70s, back when we were working with some of the aviation companies we used to make a lot of the no smoking signs, things like that. We also do it for keypads. Sometimes people want a keypad just blank until it's powered up and then they can see it. So we also do a thing called radio opaque printing, which is special inks that will only show up on an x-ray. So sometimes it'll be like a ruler. A doctor wants to measure something when they're doing an x-ray, that kind of thing. And then we do lots of very difficult printing jobs that most people don't want to touch. We have equipment and expertise. There's lots of printers that are very simple, but we're very, very complex, very engineering minded. So we do a lot of things that other people won't tackle. So Ms. Hall, could you advance this? Okay, so that's all great, but how did all this happen? How did we get here? So you can switch this again real quick. So I want to talk a little bit about my grandpa. And I should preface that he's an interesting man. My grandfather did some very interesting things, I will say that. Very difficult human being. We didn't have a great relationship. I actually didn't talk to him for a decade of my life. He just said things he shouldn't have, but he's from that tough generation. He went through a lot of stuff, and he had a tough upbringing too. So I mean, it makes sense, and I made my amends with him. It's not worth holding a grudge with anybody. But, I don't have a ton of very early history. I just want to give you a preface of just when I say my grandfather's interesting. He's the only person I know that was in a road rally in Europe and drove off a cliff and had to come back to the United States on a boat because it was before airplanes. So he was an interesting character, that's for sure. So from the early history, I know that his father was from Vermont. His name was A.J. Hall. His father, for some reason, left Vermont in the early 1900s. I don't know the exact story on that. I've heard bits and pieces, but it's just kind of unclear. He moved to Boise, and he was an insurance adjuster, and he was about the only insurance adjuster for 4 states. So as they went through the Great Depression, his dad was fine. They lived like he was a doctor, but my grandfather barely ever saw his dad. He was always gone, so he kind of raised himself, so that probably led to some of who he was later in life. My grandfather was born in August 30th, 1917, so he grew up in Boise. They were very outdoorsy. They did a lot of stuff in the mountains. They actually had a tract of land in one of the national forests that they had a cabin on, which you couldn't get today, but they grew up and do fishing and spent a lot of time there in the summer. So his dad had met my grandfather's mom in Boise, and I don't have a ton of history about her, but she died young. She died when my grandfather, I think, was 10 or 12, or before 15. And then his dad died fairly young too, but like I said, his dad was gone a lot, so see, my grandfather kind of raised himself. He did have an older sister, though, that lived in Portland, so he spent a lot of time between Boise and Portland when he was growing up. And my mom kind of told me she helped raise him, really. Her name was Julia, but I don't think I ever met her. I think that was pre-Kyle, correct? Arlie, I'm sorry. I didn't know her, so I get a pass. So he did graduate from Boise High School in 1936. And then as he got older, he actually put himself through aviation engineering school. And he went down to Glendale, California, and he went to school there. And he actually taught school there for a while after that. So that's kind of interesting for his age to be able to do that. He was very intelligent. So he was recruited by a company called the Aeronca Aircraft Company in Middletown from Glendale. He picked up roots, moved cross country, didn't know a soul, and this is probably in the early 40s, I believe, maybe late 30s. He moved there and became an engineer, and he worked his way up to become a principal engineer for them. He actually ended up becoming a manager, kind of ran the place for a while as well. The plane you can see down here, he actually designed that plane from scratch and built it. So pretty interesting thing. And you got to remember, this is back before when aviation was just taking off. This was a whole new concept. After that, though, well, forget that Middletown thing. We'll talk about that in just a sec. I forgot to I added a slide and I forgot to take it off. So, Corey, would you jump us ahead? So, this is kind of an interesting thing. When he was 25 years old working for the Aeronca Aircraft Company, he had a couple designs. He designed 3 different airplanes that he wanted to build. And this was a brand new concept. He was marketing it as what business people would use to travel in the future. And everybody, this was a brand new concept. No one had a plane. Just the military had planes, the government had planes. Nobody had the concept of having a private plane. And at 25, he had the foresight to see the future. I thought that was kind of amazing. And he got national press from that, actually, at that point in time, too. Corey, could you move us forward? So then in the middle of World War II, in 1944, he was drafted into the Navy, and he was sent up to Great Lakes Engineering School up around Chicago, where he was working for them. So while he was there, he worked on a lot of projects, and one of the cool things he did, he actually worked on one of the very first smart bombs for the U.S. military. So he developed a smart bomb that would actually hone in on our target. I've actually got his thesis on it. It's pretty cool. It's like 80 pages long. While he was there, though, he met a gentleman from Champaign County. And what my grandfather told me, this guy was associated with the original family that owned Trainers. And he had been drafted into the Navy as well. And this gentleman had sold my grandfather on how idyllic it was in Champaign County, how rural it was and how nice. So our grandfather, when they got done with the war and he was in it, he packed up shop. They moved out and they settled in Champaign County. Now, he was in Middletown before that. He'd already met my grandmother and they'd been married, and they had my father, so my grandfather had 3 kids. He had my father, James, he had another son named Bill, that was the middle child, and then he had a daughter named Sally as well. I don't think Sally was born yet, maybe Bill was at that time. So they moved to Champaign County, though. He bought a farm on Wiseman Road. He set up shop, he had milk, he had dairy cows, and he ran it for a while. Well, it was about 2 years later, I think he hurt his back. He couldn't take care of the cows as well. And he realized just how hard farming is. If you don't know what you're doing in farming, it's very, very hard. So he decided that this wasn't really the right thing for him, and Grimes was here. So he sold the farm, he moved in town, and he went to work for Grimes Manufacturing. And he did that for quite a while. He lived on, was it Church first? Okay, yeah. So he moved to Church Street, and I think he worked for Grimes for about 10 years. During that time is when he actually went to Europe, was in that race, and broke his back, and they let him take 3 months off to come back by ship or whatever it was to do this. So they were impressed with him, I will say that. He also was a professional photographer, which is big in what we do later. So he won a lot of awards for professional photography, so he was very, very good. And this, of course, is how I remember my grandfather. I don't remember the nice young guy from the pages before, but that's the grandfather I knew. So, Ms. Corr, could you move us forward? So he saw a need for a product that Grimes was having trouble getting, for nameplates. That's how this all started for us. They couldn't get these readily enough. And my grandfather knew photography, which we used in some of this process, so he decided to leave and start the Hall Company to make these kind of products for Grimes. So these are made, there's still that emulsification process, so they would take sheets of metal, or if this is a foil product, they would hit it with they would make a film, hit it with a light to reverse that image onto here so that you could then print it, and then they would usually put a resist on this, and a lot of times they would etch this away so you'd have bare metal on the part. So that'd be something like, you'd see on this area, there's little bare metal areas. The reason they would do that is so you could stamp in a number. So we're talking aviation, so if you had a plane that went down, you'd have traceability. So that was the whole reason they did that. So he left and he started this business in his basement on Church Street. And it went great. He started doing parts for Grimes. He had just a handful of employees. One of them still worked for me 10 years ago. He worked for us for 55 years.
Wow.
They do not make people with those skills anymore. He was our tool maker, Gary Wine. Yep. So he started that. He also was very big. He was very into aviation, very big into model aviation. He actually came up with a kind of a brand new design for model aircraft landing gear, anodized landing gear. He sold these for a long time. He's actually in the Model Aviation Hall of Fame. I got a call, I'd been at the Hall Company for a couple years, I got a call, and they're, can't we want to induct your grandpa into the Model Aviation Hall of Fame? I'm like, huh? I knew we made these, so I said, yeah, absolutely, go for it. But we sold this off, it was something that was starting to go away, I think back in maybe the 80s, something of that nature. But it is a thing. But at that point, we were doing lots of lenses, nameplates, and foils. We do little printed lenses too that would go on things. There were some growing pains with this. I've heard stories that, there'd be 2 or 3 of them down working in the basement, and my grandmother would call down and say, hey, stop doing what you're doing, I need to run the washer. So that makes for some interesting things. But then a few years later, I think that was about 1961 when we started doing that, and I think it was about 1962, the city came to him and said, Mr. Hall, this is fantastic, but you can't do this here, it's not zoned for this. So he agreed and he realized he needed to do it, so he went and found the property we're currently located at, which is at 420 East Water Street. And at that point in time, there wasn't much out there, it was a horse barn, but he bought it, set shop, set just the very first part of our office, and he ran with it. So we were incorporated as a corporation in 1965. So Ms. Hall, could you please advance this? Okay, so the 1960s was when I think a lot of things started to happen and change. There was a nameplate for everything, we would say back then. Nameplates were used on absolutely everything. Now you have a laser etched on a part, you might have a little printed label on it, but nameplates were on anything and everything you could think of. Components in aviation, components in cars, everything had a nameplate to tell you what it was, what the wiring harness needed to do, that kind of thing. They grew pretty rapidly regionally. I know he started doing a lot of work for Minster Press, and then for Toledo Scale up in Toledo, and that helped us grow quite a bit. My dad, who met my mom at Ohio State, he left Ohio State after a year and came back to help with the family business. Sometimes I wonder if that was a financial decision, or if that was just my grandfather needed help, maybe a little bit of both, I don't know. I'm sure he put a lot of resources in starting a business, so I don't know the exact history on that, I don't know if you do either. Yeah. And we had what I would say is an army of artisans. So, now we do everything in AutoCAD or SolidWorks or Adobe, all sorts of different things to design. You couldn't do stuff like that back then. So it was a very different process. It was pretty ingenious what they did. They actually had a giant Nikon camera that took 2 rooms, and they had a dark room. So they would take a picture of a little part, something like this, and they would blow it up. They would develop and blow it up. And then they would have teams of artisans go in and do all the artwork and lettering and do everything they needed to be able to then produce and print the product, and they would shrink it back down to the scale to make it. So it was a pretty cool process. We still have the lens from that camera and a table someone made for us that, actually I think Gary made it, but at one point. So we got our first expansion of the facility in 1966 where we added our screen print department, at least the footprint as it is today. And then as we went through the 60s, my grandfather had met some good contacts while he was in the Navy, so we started doing some stuff for some of the naval programs. He started doing printed lenses for some ships, so there'd be lenses in some of the ships that we made for the Hall Company. Well, that led him to another opportunity. One of those people left that program and went to work for NASA. So we got the opportunity to make some printed lenses that went to the Gemini capsule, and then eventually the Apollo capsule. And the coolest thing about that, there's a printed lens on the moon rover we made on the moon. So it's fantastic. I mean, the thing that is unfortunate is I just had this from word of mouth. What I've been told when my uncle was still alive, that it was the Cold War, And everybody was worried about the Soviets, and I believe we sold that to, who did he say? It's a big company, but it was not NASA. And they would not let us keep the drawings. They threatened us. We had to get rid of them and destroy everything because they were worried about, anything that could happen. But we know it happened, and someday we'll find something we can put in our front lobby, but we know we have a part on the moon, so that's pretty cool. So that kind of closed out that decade with a bang, and then that is also when I would say we started to see our first paradigm shift, and that is plastics. Or could you jump us forward? So before this, in the 60s, everything was pretty much metal. I mean, you worked, every control panel was metal, everything like that. Everything was nameplates. So as we got into the 70s, plastics became much more readily available. And this changed what you could do. So instead of just printing on the front, if we print on a nameplate on the front, eventually that could be scratched off. On plastics, we're printing from the back forward. So we're going to print on the back. You have to actually wear through the entire overlay to do that. But it kind of gave you a unique chance to do something you couldn't do before. Now you can have instructions, you can have branding information, you can really change what a product does. I mean, you can have cool little things like this. They didn't do this in the 60s, that's digitally printed, but you can do all sorts of things like that. So it really made things overlays became the face of your product. It would tell people what it could do, what you needed to do, all sorts of fun stuff like that. So everything started to go with plastics. And really the big thing we make that you would recognize is stuff like this. We started doing a lot of these for Grimes back at that point in time. And you can kind of see a picture of one in a plane there. So at that same time, my uncle Bill, his oldest or middle son, he was drafted into Vietnam. So he went and served in Vietnam. He was injured. He came back and he came to work for us too. And Bill actually worked for us until about 10 years ago. So he was with us for like 45, 50 years, and he was kind of our maintenance guy. Really at the end, he was just kind of ceremoniously there, but that's okay, he endured it. My Aunt Sally worked for us for a while too, and she retired as a teacher from Indian Lake Schools, but she worked there in the summers and when she was younger too for a while, so she was there quite a bit too. So another thing that happened in the 70s, my grandfather always wanted to kind of look at what was next, and one of the things he was really interested in was electronics. So for a brief period of time, we actually made printed circuit boards at the Hall Company in the 60s. So we would actually do single-sided and dual-sided circuit boards. You can see some pictures of some of the very early ones up here. Now, that's a process that's expensive in Ohio. All the chemicals you have to use, all the permitting, it's very expensive. So we didn't stay in that very long, but we did work on the first circuit board for Inman and windshield wipers for GM. So that's a pretty cool thing that we did in the 70s. Mm-hmm. They quickly took it overseas though, and I think at that point it was Northern Ireland because that's where they took stuff overseas back then. But it kind of a cool little piece of history for us. We had our hands in that. But then we got out of that. It just wasn't meant to be, I don't think. So then something happened in the 70s though that kind of changed the world. Definitely changed us as a company. And that is the advent of printed electronics. So that's kind of what we were talking about earlier with this. So people came up with the concept that you could print electronics on a flexible substrate like this. So that led to the adoption of a membrane switch, which we briefly talked about earlier. Back at this point though, this was cutting edge technology. There was maybe 2 or 3 other companies in the United States working on this. So we had a customer that was curious about it, and we had dabbled in this a little bit, so we were curious too. We jumped into it. And that company's name was Bindex, so I remember them because they helped us get into this, but we designed a switch for them, and we realized, hey, we've got something here. So we jumped into it full bore, and we ran with it. So still, 40-some years later, that is our largest single product category. We make more membrane switches than anything. It's not our cash cow, but it's what we make the most of. So we had one of the first patents awarded to us on a membrane switch. That was actually in 1982 in the United States. And it just really made us be able to grow and see what was going to happen. It also led to another expansion, so we realized we didn't have enough space. So we added the whole back of our facility, which is our main production floor, we added at that point. That took us up to a little shy of 40,000 square feet we have in that building. And at about the same time too, my grandfather retired in 1978, my dad, James Hall there, took over as president. So that kind of started a whole new realm for us. Ms. Hall, could you jump us forward? All right, so the 1980s, membrane switches just took over. They became on everything. And some of the things we thought were kind of cool. Anybody remember the little tethered VCR remotes from the RCA made? We made those. We made millions of those things in the 80s. I always joke that I probably had to walk through the shag carpet to get that from my dad. We had that first patent award to us in 1982. It was one of the first patents in the United States on a membrane switch. We started working with Disney at that point too, and we made some controls that went into the monorail. We got an order for one of those last week. It's kind of weird that that popped up when we're doing this. They don't order those except every 10 years. We also did a control that was pretty cool. I remember this as a kid, but it was at Epcot Center, and it was on a ride, and you could choose which future world you went to. And remember, you pressed a button. I remember my dad taking me there as a kid, and it was the coolest thing because I got to press something that we made at Epcot Center. But that was pretty neat. We did a lot of stuff with Disney over the years there. Something else happened though in that decade that really completely changed and defined us as a company, and that was the Big Switch. So this product we were talking about earlier, of course this is a much more advanced version, but this is really what makes us us. So we had developed a very large area switch that we could maintain the same pressure all the way across the switch. Now that is very hard to do and very unique. Still to this day, we're one of the only people that can do that. So we didn't know what to do with that though. We had this product, we knew it was something, but we weren't sure where do we take this. So one of our customers in Northern Ohio was looking for a solution. They were making x-ray devices, and that was a company called Ohio Imaging. So they had had the unfortunate instance that somebody was injured by a piece of x-ray equipment. So our sales rep had talked to them, and they decided they'd take a shot at this, so they designed it into a product, worked great. They loved it, so they bought it and they started adopting it across their entire product family. Sorry, if you're talking, I've got to have a little more. So Ohio Imaging then was purchased by a company called Marconi. Marconi was a bigger company in that imaging space. Marconi was then purchased by Royal Dutch Philips. If you go back in the 80s, Royal Dutch Philips was the largest player in medical imaging. So that they adopted it across their entire product line, and very quickly, GE and Siemens copied that as well. So then this became a whole new product category for us. And the cool thing is, not too much longer, this little sleepy company in Urbana, Ohio, I guess we weren't really sleepy, we're just little. We're the global leader on these solutions. So it still is our biggest thing today. So we'll get to that a little bit more later. And then another cool thing we did in the 80s, we got back into space. So the space shuttle needed something to protect that arm that was moving around. We had a sensor like that on part of that arm, so if it ran into the side of the space shuttle, it wouldn't destroy everything. So we actually had a part on, I think, the Columbia and the, I don't remember the other one, but a couple of them, that NASA bought parts for, so that's kind of a neat little piece of history for us. Paul, could you advance this forward? Don't you feel important? So, another thing we did in the 80s, we had one acquisition during our history. Mainly we've just grown by organic growth, but there was a little building, it's still there, the building next to us, and they had a little business in there called Skullcraft. Now, me and one of my employees went through a lot of files trying to figure out if we spelled that right, because there's no digital reference to this place anymore, but we know we think it's spelled right. We don't think it had two O's, but. So what Skullcraft did, or Skullcraft, they made educational printing rules. It's kind of like coloring rules for kids to help them learn things. And there was a little device that would move it forward. We bought that. In fact, I don't think we bought it. I think we just took over their debt and just took over the business because we were a printer. It made sense, right? Well, at the same time this was happening, personal computers hit the market, and pretty quickly this became an endeavor that just wasn't meant to be. So we ran it for a while, and then we ran normal production in there, and eventually we just sold the building. It just wasn't meant to be. But we survived it. You know, every business goes through, you got to try sometimes to grow. I wish I still owned the building because I could just lease it to somebody else, but that's okay. I have to pay someone to mow it too. The other thing is that's just a copy of our patent. I know it's kind of hard to see, but it's pretty cool. You know, we only have one patent, so I'm excited about it. I let it expire about, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago, because we don't build switches the way it's stated in that patent, so it wasn't worth paying to keep, but it's fun history though. Did you advance this whole? So as we got into the 90s, more momentum continued to grow. My father ran the company for a very interesting time, for a lot of great growth. I remember as a kid him going to Japan and Europe, all sorts of places to kind of try to grow the business, and there was lots of fun things that happened. So one of the big things we saw, the big switch just completely started to explode and took center stage. GE and Siemens really started to grow. If you go and look at that industry now, Philips is not very existent in molecular imaging. It's all GE and Siemens, and then there's other people too, but it really started to pick up. Exit signs, so like, you see the exit sign here? We used to print thousands and thousands and thousands of those little orange panels. In fact, I spent a whole summer just punching those things out. I still remember the smell, it did not smell good. But we did a lot of those things for a long time. Another kind of cool thing we did in the 90s, we made a part for Mitsubishi for their 3000 GT Spider. So we had a big switch that went in the trunk. That car had a hard top that would fold down into the trunk. There was something as small as a golf ball, it would stop it folding down and crushing it. So we did that for about 10 years. That was a pretty fun part, but they got rid of that car and that kind of went away. That's also where, for us, international sales started. So our first export was to a company in Hong Kong in, I think, 1997. For a short period of time, too, in the 90s, we made a part for Penske Racing. It was something that went on the interior of the car. I think it was to tell you where the driver was, make sure he was where he was supposed to be. There was also a kind of a funny moment. It's kind of funny now when you think about it, but we had a scary moment with Siemens, because this is really where you started to see international growth starting and things starting to change. Well, there was one point Siemens just stopped ordering. This was our second, third biggest customer at this time. And they told us they'd gone with a solution overseas. And of course, this is before I was there, everybody was freaking out and they didn't know what to do and they were trying to figure it out. I think about 6 months went by and they called and they said they were sorry and they placed 2 years of orders. So they tried to buy it cheaper overseas and it didn't work. What these switches we make, they're very hard for our team to do. They're finely tuned. So that was kind of our first experience with our value to some of our customers. I mean, because this was something everybody would fight for decades. It was kind of a preview of what the future held, but it was still a big thing. Siemens is still my second biggest customer, by the way. They still buy stuff continuously, so they've never looked back after that. Another thing we saw was kind of the introduction of hybrid switches, where people started to look at placing switches on PCBs, as we talked earlier, so that kind of started. And then we actually, for a while, we made them up until maybe 2016. We made this like very in-depth alignment gauge for Grimes. And we found out, I don't think we knew what it was at first, but we found out it actually went on the boom on refueling tankers. So as the jet would come in, this is what they used to align so they wouldn't crash into the jet. So we made that for a while. That's a pretty cool part to make too. Ms. Hall, please advance us. I know that guy. So as we got into the 2000s, I would say change was kind of the constant. So we launched our first version of our website. That was kind of neat. We weren't one of the first companies to do it, but we still did it pretty early. Nameplates that had driven our business so much in the years, they really started to become kind of a legacy product. Just people were starting to get away from them. You know, if you went to the Hall Company in the 80s, there were just rows and rows of punch presses that were putting holes and corner radiuses and stuff. We still have them. They still run, but we don't have as many of them, that's for sure. There was lots of tough things to weather through the economies in the 2000s, from the dot-com crash all the way up to the financial recession. And then, of course, there's me that joined in 2008. Unfortunately, my father passed away in 2008. And, I grew up watching my father and my grandfather's relationship, and they kind of fought over the business some and control of it. And my dad and I were real close. And I just said, I don't want anything to do with that. I'm not going to do this. And I went and did my own thing. I went to work for a consumer packaged goods company. I did that. I was gone for about 15 years. And then when my dad passed away, I just came back. And, you can't walk away from that. Our average employee tenure at that point was like 25 years, and you can't walk away from that. Plus, I learned enough to be dangerous, I guess, at least. I think if you grow up in a business, you just go into it. It's hard. You don't learn from all of the mistakes you can make, and that's how a lot of businesses don't make it, I think. But I guess I learned enough to keep going. So. That's also where we got into capacitor switches and sensors. We saw that coming, so that was something that we pushed. And we started to invest pretty heavily in kind of new technologies. But a lot of the stuff we had was old, so we bought a lot of new printing equipment. We got into digital printing. So before this, everything was screen printed. So we bought our first digital printer in, I think, 2009. So they're very large format. It's like a big, huge bed. So just to give you an example, if we're going to make a graphic, so like this graphic here, oh, that's not a good one. We're going to make this graphic here, and we're going to screen print it. Every single color is a different screen, different setup, a different operation. So it might be 10, 15 screens to make one part. That's a lot of labor. That does not make it very effective. So now we have huge flatbed digital printers. We can just load up material, and it prints every color, and it cures it while it's printing. Huge time saving. It makes us competitive with overseas a little bit better. Another thing that started happening in the 2000s were LEDs took over. Before that, there was different lighting, but this is where really LEDs started to pop up on every part you can think of. The other thing that changed a lot of things at this point in time was GE, who's always been a steadfast American company, started to move a lot of their stuff overseas. They started to move to China, Israel, lots of other places. But that shook things up for us a little bit because we did a lot of business with GE. Ms. Hall, did you advance this? Just an example of some LEDs. I don't know, I'm sure you all know what an LED is, but they can be very bright and you can do all sorts of fun things with them electronics. So that really changed a lot of stuff for us. Let's get this forward here. Okay, so again, the 2010s, I'd say the world got much smaller. One thing we did, we expanded our screen print department so we could fit the digital print and some other stuff in there. It was internal, but we still changed the footprint of it. So GE, as they moved international, they launched a division in Israel. So for a long time, there had been a big conglomerate that was making parts and medical products in Israel. Well, GE bought part of it, Philips bought part of it, and Siemens bought part of it. And these guys were all engineers from there, they all became competitors. That's kind of a weird thing we hear from them sometimes. But they decided that they wanted to move a lot of their production overseas to try to be competitive. So they did move a lot to China, but their really complex stuff, they moved to Israel. Because it is cheaper labor than the United States, but you have a very, very educated population. So it made sense. So we started working with GE Israel. GE Israel is my biggest customer today, just in case anybody's wondering. We started doing, our international sales started to grow, obviously, we're starting to sell to Israel, but we started to see it from kind of everywhere. This is where I have to say pressure from overseas manufacturing really started to hit its peak, where we started to see things like membrane switches started to become more of a commodity in companies, where they would just go try to shop it out to Southeast Asia. Now, I will say something. That works in some cases, but it doesn't work in everything. And that Siemens example is a good example. They won't buy a lot of the collision switches like that. They want them in the US because they're made differently. Our quality systems are different. The other thing I will say too is, when I was in college, I had a microwave. And that thing ran for a while, and I got rid of it. I bet that microwave is still floating around Wright State's campus somewhere. Someone still uses it like that. Am I getting brain cancer? But it probably still works. Now, since I moved back to Urbana, I've had 4 microwaves, and they've all failed, and it's always the keypad, which drives me crazy because I make keypads. But it's because it's just made cheaply. It's made. I think it's planned obsolescence. But for medical equipment, a lot of industrial things, military stuff, it needs to last, and that's where we start to see our niche. So we don't do a lot of consumer stuff, but every now and then we do. We started marketing silicone rubber keycaps, and as I mentioned, it's something we had to buy from overseas, but we just had to do it because our competitors were doing it. We started to see a lot of customer changes too, and this is where all the consolidations and mergers started, and a lot of our customers bought each other and sold each other, and we lost huge pieces of business because this company bought it and they already had a vendor. Sometimes we gained big pieces of business, but that changed a lot of things, made things very difficult. That's also when we started working with a company called Aga Marvell. So we started making this fun little guy. So this, the part that went on the $3,000 wine chiller. So pretty cool stuff. This is a part, they wanted a capacitive switch, but then this was designed to be on the top of the wine chiller and it could be outside. And if you had condensation in the part on this, water has a capacitance value. It could throw the switch. So you could have a nice wine chiller, thousands of dollars of wine in there, and dew could ruin it. So we developed a simulated capacitive switch, and our engineers came up with a way to printing so that they could do this, where it felt like a capacitive switch, felt very, very sensitive, but it was actually a resistive switch on top of a PCB. So we made thousands and thousands of these for quite a while. So that was a great little part for us. We also had some of our best years. The late 2010s, the teens were fantastic years for us. Then, of course, with all the customer consolidations, we started to see vendor consolidation. So all of our vendors started to buy each other and sell each other and become huge companies. So now in today's world, you have these monstrous vendors that are billion-dollar companies. You have the Hall company, then you have these monstrous companies that are billion-dollar companies. So I'm a bank most of the time for them because I'm fighting terms with them, but we still hang on. So we continue to upgrade and modernize equipment and try to be as competitive as we can. And this is also where we really saw medical sales start to really outgrow everything else. Medical just marches on no matter what happens in the economy. So if it's down here, it's probably not down in China. So next slide there, Ms. Hall. So as we got into the 2020s, I don't think anyone in business had a clue what was coming. I know I sure didn't, but 2019 was fantastic. We had a great year. 2020 started great, and then the world crashed. No one saw that coming. We didn't think it was going to be that bad at first because we make a part for a company called Gentherm Medical, and they make warming and cooling blankets for emergency rooms. So if you go in for really high fever, or they have to lower your body temperature, raise it, they put this blanket on you. Well, they bought like 5 years worth of stuff in 1 month in March of 2020 because hospitals were billing for these things. So we said, hey, maybe this won't be that bad. Well, we didn't know. So they did, that was great, but then all the aviation stuff, as everything came to a grinding halt, A lot of the stuff we do is for elective surgeries in medicine, so we make a lot for a company called ComEd, and they're doing like, you have to have a hip replacement, like all the stuff for that. Well, all that stopped, so we survived, but man, it was a roller coaster for several years. And I will say though, in the middle of that, we were working on this guy, which was that next generation for GE Israel, so that was great. Of course, it got delayed a little bit because of COVID, but they did launch that. Hasn't quite taken off to the level they thought, but I'm sure it's very expensive. We also got our first robot in the 2020s, so we got this little guy right here that actually tests that part. Somehow we talked GE into buying us a $115,000 robot. They don't really do stuff like that, but there was reasons for it. So then after we went through kind of the whole thing of COVID, then we went through all these different weird shortages. We went through there were supply chain shortages, nobody could get anything. Everything would be fine, and be like, we can't get white ink. Like, what do you mean we can't get white ink? Like, we need white ink, it's in everything, you know, it's a base for everything. Or then we couldn't get connectors or backplates or whatever it was. We went for like 2 years of that. Then we went for this whole thing of price increases, where all the vendors started taking price increases, and we had to very quickly jump for that. And of course, then we had all the mass retirement of baby boomers. So the first part of the 2020s were a little chaotic, but we got through that. Now what we're kind of seeing though is that it's been pretty evident the last couple of years how much political uncertainties can drive markets. You know, you look at like last year when there was the election, every one of our customers just kind of paused. Not really stopped, but it's like nobody was investing in anything. And then they picked up pretty quick after that. And you kind of see how some of that stuff drives. We also face a lot of challenges with tariffs. You know, like the covers for these, we have to bring in from China. Now, there's a funny story behind that because this is a kind of unique product. So we have lots of circuitry we do in the middle of this, all sorts of drivers to make this a very sensitive device. There's a hard cover and a soft rubber cover on the outside. Those two have to fit like a glove or none of that's gonna work. So we said, okay, we'll go find somebody to do this when they want to launch this. So we went and found a happy little injection molder in Pennsylvania. We don't usually buy injection molded stuff. Most of our stuff is thermoform, which is a whole different black card. So we found this company, and it was like $275,000 in tooling. And GE laughed and said, we're not gonna pay that. I laughed back and said, I'm not gonna pay that. So if you want the sparks, you're gonna have to figure something out. Well, they did. They said, why don't you go to our vendor in Shanghai and buy this? So we did. And then it took about 18 months for that vendor to figure out how to get this to work right. It would have been cheaper if they just bought it in the United States, but I'm not gonna argue with them, they're the customer. But to bring those in, you know, tariffs were, I don't know, 10, 15%, depending on when it was. We got caught with an 85% tariff on those last year. And when it was in transit, we had to pay. We're still trying to fight to get back. So, I mean, tariffs hurt. They add a lot of cost to everything. That's been challenging. As we've gone through the first part of the decade, there's been lots of exciting things going on. We started working with Konica Minolta. That was a brand new, very big customer for us, and that's just picking up and taking off. So that's been great. We are seeing a lot of onshoring again. I think where a lot of stuff was made overseas, we're starting to see people want to come bring stuff back, so that's fantastic. I'll say the rest of the story shouldn't be written. We're excited. I've been there 18 years now, and we have never been working on as much new stuff as we are right now. There are people from all over the world. There's all sorts of interesting things on. Can't really talk about too much of it, but that's our story. So, does anybody have any questions? That was a lot of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks. I bet you didn't know we did that in Urbana.
A long way from what my mom was doing.
Yeah.
How do you go to market? Like, do you have a dedicated sales force, or do you go through?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I've got an internal sales team. We've had all sorts of outside sales reps, but that's changed a little bit. We use brokers sometimes, so it just kind of depends, you know. But we're looking for a sales rep, but we don't have the right person right now. But you know, it's getting so hard to get in front of these big companies too. It's a challenge.
Yeah.
And a lot of our customers are not here anymore too. That's another problem. Yeah. Yes, ma'am?
Do I need to start this?
No.
Okay.
Does anybody else have any other questions? All right, well, thanks for taking the time to listen to me. If you want to go out and see some stuff, you're welcome to. Appreciate it.
We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Very informative.
Thanks.
Thank you all for being here, and don't hesitate to ask him questions on the way out if you have any.
If I can't answer, I'll just send you to my daughter. Thanks.